Welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I'm going to be looking at the price increases of PSA 6 and 7 Hall of Fame rookie cards compared to the price increases for PSA 8's. I'm going to be looking at mostly 50s and 60s Hall of Famers, but some 40s, especially the late era 40s. And what I'm really looking at here is, in the past, PSA 8's have been sort of the alpha and omega, most commonly traded high-end rookie card of most 50s and 60s Hall of Famers. And when prices spiked, the 8's would spike the highest and the most, from a percentage increase in total value. And the 6's and 7's were always kind of flat. They would gain a little bit, but they wouldn't grow at nearly the rate of the 8's. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that change where the 6's and 7's are becoming more sought after because as prices increase and availability wanes, the 6's and 7's become the alternative. And people have realized that a lot of 6's and 7's are still really nice cards. So we'll get into the comparison. And I'm using Hall of Fame rookie cards. And I'm also going to do football versus baseball as well. So we'll see if there is a big difference between, football and baseball, and if we're seeing some actual increases in price, or some, gaining in traction between football and baseball. So we'll get into it. So we'll start with Hall of Fame baseball. And so I picked, what you would consider to be the normal cast of characters for baseball rookies. We've got the Leaf Jackie Robinson I threw in there because it was an interesting one because it's actually gone down in price as a PSA 8 as it super spiked really hard in 2020, and it's slowly been going down, and it's actually lower in 21 than it was at this time in 2020. So the other one that's interesting is the Stan Musial. The Leaf has not been sold as an 8 very often, and including in 21. So the Leaf is just so rare in an 8 that I didn't even want to do a price comparison. But it's a normal rookie cards you would expect from the 50s and 60s. I did throw some lower end ones in there, so it wasn't all $5,000 and $10,000 rookie cards. And so some interesting things here, and I'll flip back and forth between football and baseball a few times because there is some interesting comparisons. But in general, we're seeing is that the PSA 6 and 7 increases are mirroring or closer the PSA 8 increases than I expected. And there's some really good, comparisons here and things to think about. One is you've got this PSA 8 Jackie that's gone down in value actually, so it's built, it's below 100, so it's gone down like 4.91% compared to what it was in 2020. And the 51 Bowman Mays is really strong in the 6 and 7 grade, much stronger than the 8. In fact, 50% or more better in the 6, for example, and almost 50% more in the 7. And that's really because I just think that the pricing of the 8 and the availability of the 8 has gotten so hard that you're seeing a lot of people just, competing on the 6 and 7s. And then you see the Yastrzemski and the 60 tops. And I think that's an interesting price point. But again, I think it's because the 7s were so cheap. It was a $500 card a year ago. Now it's a $1,000 card. And I think that really just shows you that, those 6s and 7s were so price depressed for a lot of years, and they're finally catching up. And then the last one's a Star Jewel. And again, a 7 was $400, a year ago, and it's gone up to 7. And it's interesting that the PSA 7 is worth almost as much as the PSA 8. And if you look at the pricing, there are some cards like that where the 7 is worth today what the 8 was almost worth a year ago. And that is an interesting dynamic to me is, that, the prices on some things have gone up that much. So this is, all the players and the percentage increase, in 6, 7, and 8 from 20 and 21. We'll go into football, and the first thing I'm going to call here is, before I go into the interesting prices, is Football in general didn't follow the pattern, and I'll show you the averages overall, but it didn't follow the pattern of baseball very closely. So that was the first thing, and I'll show you the summary here in a minute. But you can just see like a lot of the sixes, they've gone up 3%, less than zero, like -7, 10%. So they're not 16%. They're not really following that 50% or above like we saw with a lot of baseball. The other thing too is I'll point out, let's say the Johnny Unitas and Bart Starr rookies. You see that in 2020 they were worth less than 1050, and in 21 they're worth less than $1,500. So let's go back up to the baseball. You see that Al Kaline was worth more than either one of those rookie cards, that Unitas or Star, as a 6 in 2020 or as a 6 in 2021. It's really interesting to me that the Bart Starr and Johnny Unitas 6s are worth less than Al Kaline. The other thing that's interesting is that when they move to 7s and 8s, they're worth a lot more than Al Kaline. So 23.75 for Kaline and 21. You go to the Unitas and Star, they're worth over 3,000, and the Star's worth almost 4,000. The other thing that's just really crazy is that the Unitas in an 8, which is worth $14,000 compared to the Star, which is $10,000. There are some pop report differences between the two, but I don't think it's significant enough for a $4,000 gap. Considering that in a 7, it's reversed. So there's just some really price inequities there going on between the Unitas and Star that are going to be corrected at some point. But the fact that in the PSA 6, those two cards are worth less than the K-line, but worth a lot more in a 7 and 8. So there's a lot of pricing oddities here, and I think eventually you're going to see this whole thing shake out to where you get, a lot of movement in the PSA 6 football cards eventually. So let's go to the summary. Sorry, I was pointing out a few cards here. Like the other thing too is that the cards that are really increasing in PSA 7 for football cards are the more expensive cards. So you see the Sammy Bond, the Autogram, the Bart Starr, the Joe Namath, where they're outpacing the 8. And again, I think it's the same thing as the we saw in baseball is when that 8 becomes so expensive or so hard to get, then people will go to the 7 and 6, and that's what you're seeing here is that outpacing of the 8 just because of availability or pricing. So that's definitely happened. So let's go to the summary. So you see baseball doesn't follow what I call a linear path, where you see 6 to 7 to 8, everyone goes up a certain amount more than the other. Here, the 7 is actually outperforming the 8 by 5%, or 4.5%. But still, it's more, and I think that's significant, showing that what I was talking about earlier is that the availability of the 8 is lower. So finding the PSA 8 Hall of Fame rookie cards of these Hall of Famers in baseball are just getting so hard and so expensive that everyone's struggling and going just, okay, I'll get the 7. I can't afford the 8 or can't find it. And that 7 price is getting more and more competitive, and it's just driving price up on it. In the 6, 51% increase is still really good for a 6, when in years past they were more flat. It is growing in that 5 or 10% range. So it does, the 6 is becoming more popular and more competitive. It's just not as growing as fast as the 7, because the 7 is the best alternative to the 8. But you go to football and it follows a linear path, where the 6 is lower than the 7, which is lower than the 8. And I think this is, again, a maturity issue. This is where you've got, Hall of Fame rookie cards in football just don't have, the history of and the competitiveness as they did in baseball, to the point where the 6s and 7s have matured in price, or people are seeking them out as often, because in general the price point of the 8s is so much lower in football that people can still afford them. And in fact, if I was going to give someone advice right now, I'd say you know, Hall of Fame football cards and PSA are, a good price, and maybe instead of seeking out the baseball sevens, maybe you should be seeking out the football eights. So let's look at the overall average prices here and just look at a comparison. So as far as increases between the sixes and sevens by sport, you can see on the top line here in the first graph, baseball is, by a long shot in each category, 6 to 7 to 8, increasing in price at a greater clip. So even though football is making some inroads, or you can see the eights are getting closer than the other prices, 7 to 6, it's still a pretty big gap. But it just shows you, kind of that delta between the two sports is still pretty big. So the other thing that I'd say is, going to the second graph, which is the average price. So the average price of that list of Hall of Fame football cards was around $1,400 to almost $10,000 for baseball. So the sixes are still like $8,000 more for similar year Hall of Famers in football versus baseball. And I try to include every good Hall of Famer rookie card there. But when I look at those eights, when you're seeing a delta of $83,000 versus $10,000, $70,000 price gap, you can see why people are running towards that seven. But my point of view is, let's run towards that football PSA 8. That would be my advice again is, that PSA 8 football average price of $10,000. I know it's still $10,000, but I think that compared to baseball, I mean, that's a huge delta and gap that you can definitely work with, in terms of investing. And the sevens are even more, reasonable. And in fact, if I was someone saying like, okay, I'm getting priced out, PSA 6 Hall of Fame rookie cards are something you can definitely afford. If you look across that list, so I'll go back to them. There's many PSA 6 Hall of Fame rookie cards below, like the Joe Green's below 200. The Terry Brownshaw is below 500. The Fran Tarkenton is below 500. The Don Hudson's below 500. The George Blend is below 200. These are all prices that you can definitely afford in this space compared to other cards. The Frank Gifford's below 400. The Bowman Large. I just think that's a lot of great Hall of Famers below $500. But you go up to baseball and there's a few cards, the Juan Marichal, the Willie Stargell are below 500. But, on that list of 50s cards, there's very few below 500. There's none in a PSA 6. I'm just looking at PSA 6s. You get to PSA 7s, there's only one card that's Marichal below 500. You get to football again, there's still cards below $500 in a PSA 7 in football. George Blanda, Joe Green again. The Staubach's close to $500. So that just shows you, like, if you wanted to have some value plays, going out and getting some cards, the football cards are still, something you can chase and get at a good price point. So going back to the final graph here, again, the good thing is, that pricing of the sixes and sevens is going up at a greater clip than it has before. Baseball, it's kind of going more linear on the seven than definitely in football. But that just shows that that's the pricing is really affecting that. Seeing that huge price gap between that 8 and 7, shows you why that's happening. But football has a lot of runway. PSA 6s and 7s in baseball are starting to gain in value. And it also will affect grading because, in the past, for some of these Hall of Famers, 6s and 7s were considered, kind of a disappointment in the grade. Now, sending grades in and you get a 6, that's still a good grade. I think you're going to see that people are going to view that as a desirable grade. Where in the past, I think if 60s Hall of Famer as a 6, it was almost considered a low end or a mid grade card. Maybe we'll start seeing a 6 as a little bit more high end, or maybe it's like a good grade, versus being kind of, oh man, I got a 6. That's not a good grade. I think now we're going to see those cards as being valuable. A lot of them are going to be worth $500 to $1,000 on average in those Hall of Famers, and that's a lot of money for a card that is much easier to find in the wild than an 8. And that's another thing too, is that as grading becomes more mature and these cards are harder to find in the pristine condition, those 6s and 7s going up in value is very good, because it just means that submitting and finding those cards will be easier to find those condition in collections, but it's worth submitting them because grading is getting so expensive, right? So that's it. That's my kind of like rambling message about the differences between 6s and 7s, but it's showing the hobby is very healthy on the vintage side. That we're seeing these price increases on these 6s and 7s, much higher than I thought they would. And the fact that 7 doing better than the 8 just shows that the hobby is getting smarter. It's reacting to the pricing on the 8s and the availability. So it's healthy. It shows that the market is definitely maturing and pivoting in the right way, and people are getting smarter about how they're spending the money and understand where value is. So that's it, guys, and I'll talk to you next time as I'm working on my show number 6. Please check out my other videos. I'm working hard on them. If you have any constructive criticism, please let me know. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.